there's kind of no denying, at least from a recognizable, if you had to like look, how do you quantify it? How do you measure it? There's no denying that evil takes place, you know, like you could come up with any number of massacres throughout history, and you say that's an evil act.
There's no question.
Right. So evil is a thing that's real.
If there's good, there's evil.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there have been many, many things that people have done. You're like, wow, good exists in the world. There is still good. So we know both those things are real things. We just don't know what's the root of them all. And are there really angels and demons, or are those the scapegoats for this bizarre dance of good and evil that just exists in the world?
Mm-hmm. Well, if it weren't, for Adam and Eve eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there wouldn't be any perception of good and evil. It'd just be true or false. Which is the reason that Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, because in the beginning, it was they were living in a world of either truth or falsehood.
You're right.
And after eating the fruit of the difference between good and evil, they became opinionated. Oh, that's good, I like it. That's bad, I don't like it. But the issue of true or false got became muddled.
Yeah.
And they no longer were fit inhabitants of the Garden of Eden, of paradise.
What's your take on Lilith?
Yeah, Lilith. Well, there's no mention of her in the Bible per se, but there's a lot of mention of her in the rabbinic literature that sprung up after the Bible. Yeah. The story is that I think after Cain killed Abel, that Adam. No. Was it that after that? I think it was after Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden. That they stopped having sex. So Adam, then was just sleeping, with Lilith, and they spawned innumerable demons as a result of their relationship. Yeah, and after a while, Adam and Eve, reconciled, and they got the things together again. Yeah. But Lilith, plays a role in the understanding of evil in the world, like it's the result of the spawn of Lilith.
What do you think Lilith was originally? If it was a thing?
Yeah. I don't know. Well, that's called, midrash. It's the explication of the Bible, by the rabbis. So it's what's called extra-biblical. Yeah, and I've only looked into extra-biblical stuff to a certain extent.
What's the source of that stuff?
The imagination. And I think, the surrounding environment, societies, culture, influenced by the Greeks, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Hittites. There's a lot of accumulation of other cultures onto interpreting the stories that occur in the text. A lot of fanciful things and entertaining things, like, for example, Lilith is the source of the demonic entities out there.
Yeah, I found out about Lilith like 6 months ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I never even heard about it. Do you remember when we found out about Lilith? Somebody brought it up on a show, right?
Yeah, who brought it up, I'm wondering.
I don't remember, but I was like, what? Who's Lilith?
Yeah, was it Jordan Peterson?
It could have been.
Yeah, but
very
because
possibly.
He's a keen student of the Bible.
Yes, very possibly.
Yeah.
I do not remember, though. But I remember thinking, like, wow. Like, and then the original story. Like, so when you're talking about the biblical translations of the Adam and Eve story that we're all accustomed to, it's all a watered-down sort of, or a strange translated version of the ancient Hebrew. But you've read the actual ancient Hebrew version of it. Like, what did you get out of it? Like, what did you...
Well, most of the translations of the Hebrew Bible are quite good. Like, the King James Version, it's, very accurate. Yeah, it's a bit, stilted.
Is anything missing in the translation from when you read it in ancient Hebrew, or do you think it's pretty clear?
It's, fairly one-to-one correspondence between the Hebrew words and the English translation. Certain things are interpreted through a Christian lens because the Christians wrote the King James Bible translation.
Right.
Yeah. But, the words and the grammar and the narratives, they're pretty much accurate. Yeah. They spent a lot of time working on painstaking, translations, so there was a responsibility, to do it accurately.
Imagine that story, like trying to like pass that one down for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so there was only two people, and then there was an apple,
Right.
and a snake talked Eve into eating that apple, and everything got fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very strange story, isn't it?
Very strange story. What do you think it really was all about?
I think there were two people named Adam and Eve,
For real?
as if they were real.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you imagine that there was an Adam and Eve and you visualize the garden they were in and the snake and their interactions, there you have it.
So you think the biblical interpretation is a literal recalling of actual events that took place?
No.
No.
I don't think that. Well, it's like if you smoke DMT and you enter into this world, it's true, it's overwhelmingly convincing, it's got its own laws, its own system. Things are regular. Like certain things happen, certain interactions take place. Yeah, and you're there. You're convinced it's real, and you interact with it to the best of your ability. So I think that's the case with the narratives in the text. It's not. It isn't a matter of interpreting what they mean, as much as understanding what happened.
Boy, that's obscure. So it's not interpreting what they mean, but understanding what happened.
Yeah, what did the snake say to Eve?
So a snake really talked to Eve, though?
It was as if a snake talked to Eve.
As if.
Yeah.
So perhaps a psychedelic experience, perhaps an altered state of consciousness?
No, I think it was a case of a woman standing near a tree and a snake coming up to her and saying certain things, and they have a conversation.
For real, for real.
As if it were real. Well, the stories have been told so many times.
Right, that's the problem.
And, they seem... Well, if you...
Seems like they're blaming everything on Eve, too, which is like a little suspect. I like to hear her side of it.
Well, the one who got punished without even having a chance to explain himself was the snake. So God asks Adam what happened, and he asks Eve what happened, and he just lays it on the snake.
Right.
Yeah.
And the snake's like, I didn't tell her anything. I can't even talk.
Well,
this lady wanted to eat that apple, and she blamed me.
Well, back then, snakes could talk. Or in that world, snakes talk.
How so?
Well, they were the wisest of all the animals in the garden. So, they could speak.
Right, but you speak of these things as if, like we're talking about when you go to the zoo, the monkeys swing from the vines, it's normal. Snakes talk.
Well, it's a bit of a paradox. Like if you...
Let me ask you this.
So if you treat those stories as if they were real, you're opening yourself up to this universe of Adam and Eve were in the garden. Then they had Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. Then Cain had children, and his children begot the 70 nations. And then there was a flood because mankind was bad. Noah and his family survived. They all spoke one language afterwards. There was on a tower. There was Nimrod, there was Abraham, there was Isaac and Jacob. So it's this world which seems to be quite coherent, quite consistent. It all ties together. It's quite consistent from book to book, from narrative to narrative. It is a different way of looking at the Bible. It isn't dogma like you have to do this or you have to do that. Or it isn't like a Jungian archetype or a psychodynamic, wish fulfillment. It's this world that that is articulated, spelled out in a very ancient, very influential text.
So, is it also possible that something completely different took place, but that over time and over a oral tradition of who knows how many hundreds of years before they actually wrote it down? And then writing it down, that you're getting a version of the actual event that's very different than what really took place. But you think about it like the version in the scripture. And if you think about it in the version of the scripture, are you thinking about it like as if this was an event as recorded, or are you thinking this is a representation of an archetype or some sort of moment in human history that they're trying to recollect and pass down?
Well, if you
that makes any
consider,
sense.
yeah, kind of, yeah. Well, if you consider, the text to be prophetically received, prophecy is communication between the divine and man, and the text was prophetically received. In fact, Philo of Alexandria, one of Terence McKenna's heroes, used to say, the most accurate historians were the prophets. Because they heard it, directly, from the initiator of the event, the witness of the event, the one who, could understand the event in the huge context. So it's a prophetically received, text, which means it contains information received from a spiritual sort of level, which you would think is a universal field of sorts.
How much have you ever paid attention, if at all, to any of that ancient Sumerian stuff, like the Anunnaki and...
Some. Yeah, I watched this really great documentary a few years back. Yeah, but I wouldn't consider myself as knowing much about it.
Right. That, to me, is one of the weirder origin stories.
Yeah. So what is that origin story? On my recall, it's quite fascinating, but not the details.
Well, there's multiple versions of it. First of all, the story of this, the fantastic story is told by Zecharia Sitchin. So Zecharia Sitchin, who wrote The 12th Planet, and he wrote several other books. He was a biblical scholar and a linguist, and he spent a lot of time studying the ancient Sumerian text, the cuneiform. And what he believes is that it tells a story of an ancient relationship between a race of beings on a far distant planet that's in an elliptical orbit, and it comes near Earth every 3,600 years, and that they had engineered human beings out of lower primates. They had accelerated our evolution, and that all of what we know about the cosmos, all of what we know about, they have these detailed, I don't see the ancient tablets that have a detailed map of the solar system from 6,000 years ago.
Right, okay.
They have the sun in the center and all the moon, and they have these really enormous beings. And these enormous beings were supposed to be these things called the Anunnaki.
Okay.
And the literal translation is those from heaven to earth came.
Uh-huh.
It's one of the weirder, if you love a great science fiction version of the origin story of humans, it's the most fun one.
Yeah, it brings to mind the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, which occur in the story of the flood and Noah.
The Nephilim, too.
Yeah, the Nephilim, the Rephaim, they were huge. They were giants.
Yes, yeah.
Men of renown.
Yeah.
And they intermarried, or they had sex with the daughters of man, and from them came a race.
Yeah.
So that story is interpreted or perceived through the lens of the Hebrew Bible too.
Really?
Yeah. Well, that is a story in the text. Before the flood, is the B'nai Elohim, come down to earth. They have intercourse with, the daughters of man, and out of those relationships, comes this race of giants.
That's the most fun one.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Well, they all got swept away in the flood. So that's an interesting. Turn of events.
Well, if you interpret the flood as the Younger Dryas impact theory, which created the flood, which lines up.
Right, that does line up.
Yeah, it lines up time-wise, lines up with how it would go down. Yeah, just no evidence of giants. That's the only thing we're missing. If they found some giants.
Well, in the meantime, you can assume that the giants were real, and understand their origin, what they were like, what they did, why they did it, what the results were.
Terence McKenna once said it best, that science asks of you one miracle. That's the Big Bang.
Yeah.
There's one miracle. It really is kind of like a miracle.
Yeah.
If in the beginning there was nothing, and then God created the earth and the skies. And it's essentially what the Bible is trying to say. They're just doing it in a way.
And the Bible got it right. They got the order right.
Right.
You know?
I think it's based on an understanding that people had achieved. Because if you think about the Bible, right, and if all these people are correct about the original history of sophisticated civilization, if the Randall Carlsons and the Graham Hancocks and the Robert Shocks of the world and the John Anthony West, if they're correct in the timeline of, like, say, the most sophisticated society that we are aware of, which is Africa, if those people that lived in Africa 30,000, 40,000 years ago in Egypt, if they created a society that was infinitely more sophisticated than anything that we had ever seen before. Like, how did they do that? Who did that? And what was that like? Like, what the fuck was that like? What was that world like back then? I mean, have you ever really stopped and tried to think and imagine what was that world like back then? I mean,
well, how about that you have a similar world in Central and South America where they also had built things many thousands of years ago that still, like, how the fuck did you do that?
Yeah. How'd you do that?
Easter Island. How did y'all make those things?
Yeah.
How in the world? And then move them?
Well, I think if those things go down and then people have to rebuild, I think it takes a long time before people figure out what happened. I think it takes a long time. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion that you see in the Bible comes from. Like, God made the earth and the sky and everything in like 6 days, right? And then on the sixth day he rested. Okay. What are they actually saying, though? You're getting things that are translated from an oral history of 1,000 years, and then they're writing it down in Aramaic, they're writing it down in ancient Hebrew, and you're getting it many, 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 many years later, long after.
Diluted and warped.
All kinds of. Think about what people are willing to do today to the Constitution. Today. With all the information that we have about the dangers of this, think about what they're trying to do today. Now imagine what you would do if you had the real knowledge of the birth of the solar system, of the development of human beings, and the God energy of the universe, and you tried to translate it over an oral history because there's chaos, because there's no more cities anymore and everyone's dead, and you're just like hunting and gathering as cave people, and you're trying to relay this origin story of mankind, and then it gets written down in parables, and it gets written down in Latin, and it gets translated over the years, and then people try, okay, then they sit down and they look at it many years later and they go, what the fuck were they trying to say? Like, what were they trying to say? Because so much of what they're trying to say, if you're really paying attention, like, it seems like it's kind of laid out like the origins of the universe. If in the beginning there was nothing, like they're talking about the Big Bang. If these scientists all agree, how did they know that
then
back
there was
then?
light. That would be the Big Bang.
Why wouldn't they assume back then that God was always around? Why would they assume that God had to make everything? Why would they assume that there was a beginning and an end just because they have a beginning and an end? Is that rational? Why would they assume that? And why did everybody assume that? Maybe because they fucking knew. Maybe because at one point in time, whether it's 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, they had figured a lot of this shit out.
Well, someone figured something out for the pyramids and the way that they were built to be aligned so perfectly with a true north. And
just to be able to construct them. If those people were that smart, why wouldn't we imagine they had an understanding of the birth of the universe? Why wouldn't we imagine that they would have this bizarre understanding of the way morality and good and evil play out with human beings? Maybe they were right. Maybe they were right, but it all just got fucked up over the thousands of years after asteroid impacts and the thousands of years of the destruction of the advanced civilizations and the world going back into chaos and then slowly rebuilding. And you're rebuilding with these ancient texts that you find in clay pots in Qumran. And you ever seen when they translate like the Dead Sea Scrolls and they lay them out and they have to try to figure out which pieces go with which scroll, and they do it based on DNA. All this DNA is from this cow, so let's take this scroll from this cow skin and put it together and try to read what the fuck they said. It's incredible. But it makes sense. It makes sense if you buy into the idea that there's been a restart of civilization. And then you go back and say, okay, what is the history of the Bible? Like, how old is it? What's the oldest version? Like, what's the oldest version of the stories?
Version. Like, who knows?
Right,
the
right.
oral
Who knows?
version.
Right. What was the original? Like, you're playing a game of Telegram, right, or telephone with over 1,000 years.
Yeah.
With who knows how many people. But if we've seen what the Egyptian people were able to build, what was that like? How sophisticated were they? And maybe what we're getting at in the Bible is just the longest game of telephone of a true story. It's just all kind of gumbled up in stories, and God's testing you and all this thing about, God telling this guy to kill his kid. Mate, it's just a little screwed up. But it's showing you that there are evil forces at play, and there are temptations.
It's
and you must
digestible
resist
lessons
those. Yes.
in a story that you can understand.
Exactly.
And
But
that's
at
why
the heart of
7
it, there's
days,
some truth to it.
Because what is a day to God?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Is that a billion years?
Yeah.
A million years?
100 billion?
Who knows?
Who fucking knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
But it's presented in a way that you can digest it.
Yes. And then our version of it is this simplified, uneducated, barbaric version that gets translated from people that are involved in sword fights. They're fighting each other with swords and hacking each other to death for thousands of years while they're telling this story. The Crusades, all these different things that people did during that time, horrific things. And during that time, they're doing it, many of them, in defense of their God, in defense of their religion. They're motivating people by these books.
Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff. It's fascinating. But when you hear a guy like Tucker Carlson saying that what else do you know, bro? Say what you know. Like, what makes you say that? Because if that really is what it is, that would make sense to me why the government would keep that information from people. Because if we found out that people were essentially just a vessel of souls, and that we are essentially designed to give birth to artificial intelligence, and then that will be the end of us. So that's why they're not worried about nuclear war. That's why they're not worried about the environment. That's why they don't give a fuck about anything. This is all coming to an end.
We're there.
Yeah.
Like, we have it. We have it to the degree that people are already relying on it heavily.
Yeah.
Advertising agencies are relying on it to tell them how to cut a commercial, how present the logo needs to be in the commercial. Like, this is happening right now.
Oh, yeah.
This shit just appeared 3 years ago.
Right.
Because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like, there's something different that goes on there, that they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think happened? Do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Well, I think, so as a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out. Literally the end.
Yeah.
Last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And I get that. But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like, we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on. For. And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well,
how many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1
Okay.
Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus' ministry, who were there, say, at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. And you go from a bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
Do you think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's possible that they thought he was dead? Because that does happen. There was actually a case very recently where a guy was about to be harvested for organs. They thought he was dead, and this guy started moving again and came back to life. It's a very, very bizarre case because his family had been told that he was going to be harvested for organs. They were preparing for that. And this guy comes back.
Yeah, I mean, we know a lot about Roman crucifixion. And we
Pretty
know
brutal.
that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing, atheist, agnostic Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast a doubt on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Because we have not just multiple attested documents that we refer to as the New Testament, but Roman and Greek and Jewish writers refer to that claim afterwards and talk about the fact that you have this guy, and it's mocked within earliest Christianity. So one of our earliest, in fact, not one of, the earliest depiction of Jesus on the cross is called the Alexamenos Graphido. And it's probably from the end of the 1st century. And it's it depicts an individual with their arms raised in an act of worship, worshiping a man with a donkey's head who's being crucified. Whoa. And right beside it, it says, Alexamenos worships his God in Greek.
Whoa.
And it's mocking, right? Because crucifixion was for the lowest of the low. It was for like slaves. In fact, if you were a Roman citizen, you were banned from being crucified.
Who was it that got crucified upside down?
Peter.
Why? Was it because like regular crucifixion wasn't good enough for him? Or what was he didn't deserve it because Christ had gone through it?
Well, so the story is that they say, we're going to crucify you. And he says, it's like too big of an honor to die like my Lord. And they say, well, we can fix that.
Oh, Jesus. Shut your mouth, buddy.
Listen, the Romans were pretty brutal.
Oh, yeah.
But this is why we know, like it's interesting. We know a lot about crucifixion, but crucifixion was seen as so disgusting. I believe it was Cicero who said that like the word crucifixion shouldn't even be on a Roman man's lips. Wow. I mean, the word excruciating,
right.
Ex is off of in Latin, and crus, off the cross. Oh, so that's where we get that word, is because this was designed to humiliate, and it was designed to be as painful as possible. There was actually a really good article done by JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which was done by a number of, I think it was in the 70s or the early 80s. It was done by a group of biblical scholars and then medical professionals. And so they looked at the conventions of what we do know about Roman crucifixion, and then they looked at the descriptions in the gospel to try to figure out, okay, if we could diagnose how Jesus died, how would he have died? And so they basically came up with this idea that he probably asphyxiated to death. You kind of drown in your own blood. But the chances of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, I think, are narrow to none. And the chance of him appearing 3 days later completely fine, I mean, if the first thing you do, if you survive a crucifixion and then you go and you find your disciples, the first thing you say is not, peace be with you. It's get me to a hospital, right?
Did they have them back then?
No, not really.
Are we entirely certain of their measurement of days?
So this is an interesting question because of the differences between when the Gospel of John says Jesus died compared to the Synoptics, because John appears to be using the Roman convention of counting time, and the other Gospels, when they describe the timing, appear to be using the Jewish ones. And actually, if you correlate between the two, they match up pretty well. So the thing is, with Jews, any part of a day was considered a day. So 3 days and 3 nights becomes almost an idiom for any part of that day is the day. So if Jesus, and because they count evening and morning, evening to morning is the day, it's very possible that it wasn't like how we would think of 3 24-hour days, especially if he dies on Friday and wakes up on Sunday.
So that would actually make it less time than more time.
Yeah.
So it's not like he had recovery time.
Oh, no, he didn't have recovery
That's
time.
what I'm saying. That's what I'm kind of getting. It's not like it was 3 days, it was actually 3 months.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So,
no, not like that.
Then 400 people saw him afterwards.
That's the claim that Paul makes.
Paul makes this claim.
Yeah.
And how many different people have some sort of a recollection or a writing or something that's attributed to them of being witness to his resurrection?
Well, you have Peter, Paul, Jude, James, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The thing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that Matthew and John are attributed to direct disciples of Jesus. Luke and Mark are not. So they are not eyewitnesses within the Jesus community. In fact, Luke prefaces his gospel by saying that. He's right up front about this. He's like, hey, I'm not an eyewitness. Don't confuse me with an eyewitness. But he actually uses conventional writing. What's the term I'm looking for? He uses writing conventions of the day that would fit within regular biography that was written within the Roman world. So you have a guy named Quintilian who is basically, I mentioned him before with the, he's teaching people how to write. And he says that if you're going to write biography, you need to be interviewing eyewitnesses and you can't be too far away from the event to be able to write these things. And Quintilian, Lucian, and Josephus, who are all these very prominent ancient biographers and writers of history, have a lot of crossover in the way they describe how you should write history with the words that Luke uses at the beginning of his gospel, where he says, I'm interviewing eyewitnesses and I'm writing up an orderly account. And so he's saying, I'm going to use these methods that are expected as good history of my day. I'm not an eyewitness, so I'm going to try to find the people who are eyewitnesses, and I'm going to try to encapsulate this within a document that communicates what is being written.
So we have an account of the resurrection. Do we have an account of the denial of the resurrection? Is there an historical record of him just dying and this, like a refutal or a rebuttal rather to what they're saying?
No, the only ones from the ancient world that deny his resurrection are groups that come on afterwards that sometimes are described as Gnostics, and they're not necessarily just denying it for the reasons we might think they were. They're denying it because they have incorporated ideas of pagan philosophy where they believe that the spiritual is good and the physical is bad. So if Jesus was crucified, so let me back up. If Jesus is God, he cannot have a physical body. So they deny that he actually had a physicality to him. This is sometimes called Docetism because dokein in Greek means to seem. So these groups that we describe as the Docetics, they are denying that Jesus had a physical body. He only seemed to have a physical body. And they wrote documents later on. So the Gospel of Peter, which comes around in 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, is being written, and it has Jesus kind of chilling on the cross because he's not really physical because he's divine, and physical entities don't have physical bodies. So we don't actually get like a concrete denial of his resurrection in that way until you get things like the Gospel of Barnabas in the Middle Ages, which is it's actually the document that Billy brought up to me in the conversation we had as the evidence that Jesus was never crucified, the Gospel of Barnabas. Well, Gospel of Barnabas is 15th century. It paraphrases Dante's Inferno. It's not an ancient document. So, but in the ancient world, no nobody really had that big of a problem with these kind of supernatural claims. The more of the kind of skepticism was why you would worship a crucified individual to begin with.
Wow. So they were less surprised that he was resurrected.
Or that you would worship a crucified like teacher was just seen as silly.
Because it's so humiliating to be crucified.
Yeah. Yeah. And that like a god would let himself go through this.
Right.
Like what are you talking about? In fact, the ancient world didn't really have a problem with supernatural events. There is an ancient writer who mocks Christianity, and he particularly mocks Christianity in saying that, of course, Jesus did miracles because Jesus had a childhood in Egypt. And he goes, all of those Egyptians are magicians anyways. So he just learned the magic when he was a child. So he actually confirms, incidentally, two things: that the narrative in the Gospels where it says that the Holy Family fled to Egypt during the reign of Herod, he corroborates that he actually thinks that happened, and that Jesus did miracles. He just attributes the miracles to Jesus being a traveling magician anyways. And, anybody who lived in Egypt knows some magic.
That is what's really fascinating, that the mindset of the people that lived back then was that whatever was going on in Egypt was so crazy that they had to be magicians.
Yeah. Yeah, but everybody believed in supernatural events. Like, there's no such thing as like a secular work in the ancient world. Even Plutarch, who's one of the most famous biographers in the ancient world, he wrote 90 biographies, of which 60 still survive today. He was a priest of Apollo. So, like, he's already assuming that the gods exist, that crazy things are going to happen in the world. And so they didn't have a problem with people doing miracles or crazy things happening. Well,
that's also why it's so interesting trying to put your mind into the context of people that lived back then when you try to interpret what these stories were all about, because they did believe in things that weren't real. So when they talk about this thing that we're supposed to believe is real, when you have all this evidence that they believe things that aren't true, it's interesting, right? Because like you're now saying, yeah, but this one really was true,
right?
Well, there's so many different things that they thought of and believed that weren't true.
Yeah.
I mean, just recently they verified the Shroud of Turin. Have you seen that?
I've been reading about it, and I know that there's some contention, there's some discussion and debate about it, but they used to think that it was only a couple hundred years old.
Yeah.
And now they've changed that.
Yeah, they said, no, it's back then.
They also don't understand how it was made, which to me is very fascinating, because it's not paint. It's not, they don't know what caused the image itself and how that technology would have even been available.
It wasn't, no.
A couple thousand years ago.
An intense light, I mean, atomic, to leave almost like a photographic imprint on a piece of cloth.
Yeah.
And
it's wild. Pull that up. Pull the Shroud of Turin up.
Oh, yeah.
It's wild to look at because it's so interesting.
Oh, yeah. And you can see it, that it depicts a first century Hebrew male, because the hairstyle was from the first century, and a Hebrew hairstyle, that he was about 6 feet tall, that he was completely scourged all over his body. He was crucified. That's it there.
The one on the left the one on the right is just like an artistic rendition.
That's the face.
Yeah, click on that one. The face. Yeah, that's good enough. Get that large. That's fucking crazy.
Yeah. Scourged, beaten.
Yeah.
The wounds on the thorns, the hands, the feet, and the scourging, and the hairstyle was from the first century, and the pollens that they found in the cloth were from that region.
Yeah.
Also, the weave was a first century weave that was typical, and another guy, an archaeologist who I knew, who actually translated the Passion into Aramaic, told me that if you look close, you can see the image of a Tiberius coin marks on the eyes. Now, I don't know if that's real or not. I've never actually checked that, but that there's images of Tiberius on the coin.
So they would put the coins over the eyes?
Yeah. So that would date it. But they have now verified that it does actually go back to that time period. For a while, they were testing pieces that had been repaired in the 13th century, or you know. So.
What is the latest on that, Jamie? Can you see like?
I was trying to get that. I have 2 different articles from within the last 6 months saying
the
opposite
Smithsonian
things. So
yeah, opposite. Of course,
dig into which one sounded the most accurate.
Well, it's such a crazy thing to even try to verify. Like, what are you saying? You're saying that this is really the shroud that Jesus was covered in? So you're saying Jesus historically absolutely did exist, and we think that this is the shroud that covered him. That alone, people, incredulity, people's immediately their hackles raise. Like, wait a minute, and they just instead of like looking at it objectively, they almost always want to look at it from a point of view of disproving it immediately, dismissing it immediately.
But that's that's science, isn't it? You have to sort of you play the devil's advocate, and that's okay. Go for it.
Are you aware of Graham Hancock?
Oh no,
Graham Hancock is he's sort of a historian that has a very he's got a series on Netflix. He's a fascinating guy, and his career started because he was investigating these accounts in Ethiopia of the Ark of the Covenant. Right. And that they believe the Ark of the Covenant is in this one church that's protected by all these monks that wind up getting cataracts and radiation disease and sickness. And they think that it's because they're protecting this Ark of the Covenant, this actual thing, that it's an actual physical thing that's there.
And if you touch it, you get zapped.
Yeah, and that even being in its presence fucks these people up.
Maybe. Who knows? I mean, it's got to be someplace, right? They buried it. They lost track of it.
Yeah.
But, man, it used to be. And all the stories are if you even touched it, you fall over, because it was constructed electrically somehow.
Yeah, like what is that? What's in there? Why is it giving people cancer if they're really protecting it?
I think it's the actual structure of the container it's in that is the problem. That's my thought on it. I could be wrong. But I think inside it they have things from like when Moses was like manna and, stuff like that they managed to keep from, like, for example, they say that that Golgotha, the place where the crucifixion happened, it's called Golgotha, the place of the skull, because that's where Adam's head is buried.
Really?
Yes, and that it's also perhaps the same place, and it tells you it's kind of in the same area where Abraham almost sacrifices Isaac.
Oh.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's and the cross, when in any artistic depiction, at the foot of the cross, underneath it is the skull, representing the skull of Adam.
Huh.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
That's the skull of Adam, huh?
Yep.
Wow.
Place of the Skull, memory, myth, in the Chapel of Adam.
What did you find on the Shroud of Turin, Jamie?
Both those articles just asked like one person. Like one researcher thought it was, another researcher, based off of their research, said it wasn't.
Can you put it to the one that thought it was?
So the one who thought it was is like a
Does
nuclear
date to the time of
researcher.
Jesus. A nuclear researcher, Jesus
The
Christ.
other one was like a AI artist from Brazil.
Yeah.
So I don't know who has the most.
So it says, study published in the
Skin
journal Heritage. The authors conducted dating work on a sample from the shroud, coming to the conclusion that it may be a 2,000-year-old relic. The shroud, which has long been the subject of intense scrutiny, features a faint image of a man some believe is the body of Jesus miraculously imprinted onto the cloth. While the latest study does not discuss the question of whether or not the artifact was indeed Jesus' burial shroud, specifically, the authors did find its age is roughly consistent with his time. Oh.
Yeah. I think, isn't the Smithsonian guy all for it? I don't know. Maybe that's him. I don't know. But, yeah. There's for and against. There's always been.
Yeah, always. But it's just...
But the image is like,
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Whatever it is pretty crazy. And the fact that they don't know how they made it is also pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's not a painting.
Nope.
They're not exactly sure how it even came about.
Yeah. It had to have been some kind of intense light.
Well, the thought was that even trying to replicate something like that today would be incredibly difficult to do.
Sure. It's like an X-ray vision. You know?
Yeah.
It's like an X-ray. That's what you really see it in the negative only.
Right.
You know, it's
right.
crazy.
It's like a negative. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you had Mel Gibson on your podcast the other day, he brought up the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was fake. Because like in the 80s.
What is that,
in
Eddie?
the shroud, it's like the cloth that Jesus was buried in and left an image of him. And in the 80s, like 1988, they did carbon dating on it. And they go, oh, it's fake. See that?
Yeah, it literally has
I never,
the image of Jesus
Yeah,
burned into it somehow or another.
I never looked into it. I just figured it was fake. But listening to you and Mel Gibson
Yeah.
talk about it, I'm like,
It's
what?
real?
Is there a...
Well, apparently it's a lot older than they assumed when they did the first testing. And one of the problems is
Holy
that there's
shit.
cross-contamination. There's also been repairs to it. But they did subsequent testing, and they found that it was like 2,000 plus years old.
Yeah, and the one thing,
It's in
it's
the
the
range.
the most studied artifact ever.
Damn.
Like particle physicists, nuclear engineers, they all studied it, and some of them, some believe in it, some don't believe in it, but they all agree on one thing: no one knows how they did it.
Right. No one knows how they made it. It's
There's
not
no
paint.
paint. There's no
Yeah.
dye. So, dude, all this week, all day, I'm just watching documentary after podcast on this shit, and it's fucking mind blowing.
Yeah, it's pretty
It's
crazy.
mind-blowing.
If it turns out that they can't figure out how anyone could ever do it, like if no one has come up with a theory of how to do that today,
Yeah.
that's where it gets really interesting.
There's this
because
new-
it wasn't paint and it wasn't dye and it
They all
wasn't,
agree on that.
wasn't burned.
They all
in.
agree it's a mystery. But then the skeptics say, just because we don't know how it was done doesn't make it real, which is a good point. But then the other side's like, dude, all these scientists have no idea how they faked it. It's got to be real. So it's all about how you look at it.
I lean on the side be real.
There's a nuclear
Well, that would be
engineer.
the most fun.
There's a nuclear engineer. You can go on YouTube. His name is Robert Rucker. Watch his breakdown. This guy's a nuclear dude. He's breaking down the photo. It's insane because it's a negative image on a non-photographic material. It's
Right.
linen.
Right.
And then it turns out, like if you look at it with the naked eye, it's white, and then you see the image of the face is kind of like yellow. You can barely see it. But in like 1898, some photographer took a picture of it and then looked at the negative, and then all of a sudden in the negative, the whole body appears, front and back, because he was buried like with
You see the images, Jamie?
he was buried with the sheet under him, and it went around his head. That's the
crazy.
back of him, because
Yeah, the right one's the back and the left one's the front. That's crazy.
no one knows how they did it.
and it
no
even has,
no
like,
scientist.
the holes where the wrist would be nailed.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy.
that's
That was the
wild.
thing with Jesus. With me, it's very hard. It was always very hard to believe in Jesus. I'm like,
Agreed.
dude, the resurrection, like that's a hard one to wrap your brain around, right? I could believe that he existed. I could believe that he got crucified. A lot of people got crucified, but the resurrection was always the thing that kept me from really believing in Jesus. I'm like, there's no way the resurrection was real.
But even if this is real, Eddie, it doesn't mean he was resurrected, right? It just means he was crucified and he was the actual real man.
No, the thing is how the image got on. The people that believe that it's real believe that when he was resurrected, some kind of ultraviolet radiation, some kind of burst made that image. Because
gotcha.
that's because that image has never been on any other shroud. People get buried in shrouds all the time. There's never an image like that.
Pretty crazy.
And the crazy thing is the blood, there's no image under the blood. So the blood was there first, and then the image is after. It's crazy shit. Dude, I'm like, I went deep down a rabbit hole all week just watching the skeptics, the scientists, particle physicists. They have no idea how the fuck that image got on the front and back, the back of them too.